So just a couple more points that you might find helpful for the sessions in the next 2 days. First, about the body. So ideally we're putting the body into a posture so that it does not create any interferences in our practice. So therefore, during these 2 days, it might be a good time to play around a little bit with the posture to see if some adjustments to the posture work better or not, particularly in terms of what you're doing with the legs. You might like to experiment a little bit about various postures. So I think many people sit cross-legged. Of course, another variation of cross-legged is to have instead one leg in front of the other. That can help avoid cutting circulation and so forth. So you might like to experiment with that, for example. Also, of course, we want to keep the back nice and straight. So again, we want to put the posture in such a way that we're not straining to keep the back straight. So we may need to can adjust the number of cushions we're sitting on. Might like to play around with that a little bit, higher and lower, and see what sort of works best for you. And also, of course, we're mainly doing 2 15-minute sessions. So if you're finding that in the second 15 minutes you're getting some knee pain or back pain or something, then you might like to do something a little bit different for the second half, perhaps even sitting in a chair, for example. Particularly later when you get maybe feeling a little bit more tired, then you can move to a chair. So these are things we can experiment with in the next 2 days. And with the body as well, of course, the eyes, the general recommendation is to have the eyes slightly open. But again, here we can experiment a little bit in these 2 days. So particularly the practice of observing the mind and resting in awareness, there the general recommendation is to have the eyes open. But here particularly if you find there's a lot of movement and you're getting distracted, or you're having a lot of agitation and tension, you might like to even experiment with the eyes slightly closed. So that's something you can play around with in the next 2 days. See the differences between having the eyes closed, naturally open, or maybe even just slightly open. So you can play with these variations. Also the head position with regard to that, particularly if our eyes are open, you might like to experiment with the elevation of your gaze a little bit. So again, if you're finding that you're more commonly getting more agitated and distracted, maybe you can experiment with having a lower gaze. Or if you're getting quite often quite dull, experiment with having the gaze a little bit higher. Is it working? So that's something we can play with then in terms of the eyes and head position. Play around with that. And again, of course, in Shamatha we're cultivating these 3 qualities of relaxation, stability, clarity. So the first one we are emphasizing, of course, is relaxation. So really emphasizing relaxing the body, relaxing the mind, and avoid tightness and tension. So again, the goal in these 2 days is not to really see how far we can get and what sort of experiences we can have, because then we're just going to get very tight and tense and pushing, trying to gain some sort of experience. So really just these 2 days is really just to learn the practices better, fine-tune the practice, overcome any confusion about the technique and so forth. So it's basically just learning the practice a little bit better. Now if some tension of course is coming up, then particularly on the out-breath, relax, release that tension. Particularly it's good to monitor the area around the eyes and forehead. Usually if tension builds up, you'll notice a lot of sensations and things happening around the eyes and the forehead. And again, releasing that on the out-breath. If you can't release the tension on the out-breath, then don't stay with whatever object you have, but rather shift back into the body, particularly either the full body, abdomen, or even the rhythm. So bring the attention down and then just emphasize relaxing, 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 relaxing. And keep doing that until you become more relaxed. You may need to do that for the rest of the session, that's fine. When you find yourself much more relaxed, then you can shift back to whatever object you're using. So really emphasizing that relaxation. Now, of course, the two main imbalances in the Shamatha practice is dullness and distraction, or laxity and excitation. So again, for distraction, relax as soon as you notice you're distracted. So we don't need to get upset if we get distracted. In fact, be happy you've noticed you've become distracted. Then just simply relax, release the distraction, and very gently return to the object. Don't clamp down harder on the object. And then if we're falling into dullness or drowsiness, then often it's because we've sort of lost interest in the practice. Then if we've lost interest in the practice, just refresh your interest in the practice. Just remember the benefits of the practice. And then of course restore the attention and then retain that flow of mindfulness. And we can do this balancing sort of on each breath. Otherwise we'll either drift off into a lot of distraction or a lot of dullness. So in each breath, particularly on the out-breath, we can emphasize the relaxing and releasing, and on the in-breath, emphasizing sharpening the focus. And then in terms of stabilizing the attention, so we brought in a couple of things to help us to stabilize the attention if we find ourselves often distracted. So remember, for the breath, if we find ourselves distracted, then we can introduce counting or noting the breath. So if you find that helpful, you can bring that in if you're heavily distracted. And then in terms of the mind, if you're observing the mind and all the thoughts, if you find yourself heavily distracted, then we introduce this idea of labeling or noting the mental events. So again, if you find that helpful, you can bring that in. And also then we brought in the idea of then, if we're observing the mind, to then anchor ourselves back in the body, into the breath, anchoring ourselves in the rhythm of the breath. And then also in terms of the awareness practice, resting in awareness, if we're finding we're getting caught up and distracted by lots of appearances, also we can go back and anchor ourselves in the rhythm of the breath. So these are some things we can bring in if we find ourselves very heavily distracted in the practice. One last thing, and then we'll go back to the practice, and that is that in these 2 days, of course, I'll be giving less and less guidance in the sessions. So that's so that you can become more and more self-sufficient in leading the meditation, so that, you know, then you're not, when we leave here, you're not reliant on someone giving you instructions in the meditation. And also, so that's one reason we'll be doing that in the coming 2 days. So in some of the sessions tomorrow, there'll just be the bell and there'll be no guidance. So that's one reason to become more self-sufficient in the practice. And the other reason, of course, is that as a beginner, if we don't really understand the practice well, we need guidance to remind us of what to do. But once we sort of know what to do, if we continue to do that guidance, it becomes another distraction. So that's why we're reducing during these 2 days. That's why now I'm giving a lot of instruction before the meditation. So in the meditation, I don't have to talk so much and maybe distract you. Okay. So let's go back into the practice, and again, 2 15-minute sessions with a 2-minute break. setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. And setting the mind in a state of ease and relaxation. Simply allowing it to come to rest in the present moment. Simply becoming aware of the rhythm of the breath. Now, with a relaxed body and mind, shift your attention to your chosen object and sustain that with mindfulness and monitor it with introspection.